Well, ladies and gentlemen, first off, I'd like to thank everybody for coming out tonight. I'd also, just like to say, I miss these guys. Something fierce. As I'm sure, I know that some of you came from afar this evening. I know I met somebody who came from Sundre, to be able to attend tonight, or at least she had been living there in the past. These guys, of course, have tremendous reputations. They've been MPs longer than I have, 15 years, the both of them, 13 coming up for me in June. But, I stand on the shoulders of giants, and these men, of course, ran for the Reform Party back in early days when not many people thought there was much. Now, at that stage, I guess what I'd like to do is tell you a little bit about some of the criminal justice things that our Justice Minister, Rob Nicholson, is bringing forward. And I'll go through these things, and then I think, I'd love to hear your feedback and your questions later this evening, but as well, I think all three of us up here, I'd even say four, would probably like us to go even further. And so I hope part of the meeting tonight will be for you to tell us about some of the things you'd like to see done above and beyond kind of, what we're introducing here. So, of course, in our riding not that long ago up around Sunterra, we just recently in the last couple of days had a shooting that was, kind of gang related. And so we're bringing forward some measures to deal with gang murders, drive-by shootings, and additional protection for police and peace officers. One of those things is, for example, we want to have it so that if somebody commits a murder and it's involving gang activity or related to gangs, or, it automatically becomes first degree. Okay, first degree murder, which means a mandatory sentence of life imprisonment without eligibility for parole for 25 years. Okay, so that's one of those things that we'd like to move forward. As well, we want to touch on this concept, for example, of drive-by shootings, or even if you don't actually hit somebody, but if you fire a gun and it's intended to harass them or whatnot in a motor vehicle, etc. Okay, we're upping the sentences there. Reckless shootings is one of the ways to describe that. So we want a mandatory minimum sentence of 4 years in prison with a maximum of 14 years. Okay, and it would increase if it was committed for a criminal organization or with a prohibited or restricted firearm like a handgun, for example. Okay. Another aspect that I've talked about just previously, that was if it's aggravated assault against a police officer or a public officer, assault with a weapon, then it's 14 and 10 years, respectively. Okay, so we're trying to up those things so that people are committing those crimes against officers in the line of duty, that we're having that reflected. A couple stats I just want to read for you because I think it's interesting. Gang-related homicides make up for 20% of all homicides in Canada. Before I read this, I didn't know it was that high. So I think that's quite interesting. And we have 900 organized crime groups operating in this country. So that's also, I think, a troubling statistic. We'd like to increase the minimum sentence to 5 years if the offense was committed for the benefit of, or at the direction of, or in association with a criminal organization. This is referring to drive-bys. Okay? So basically a lot of stuff we're looking to create here is minimum sentences and mandatory sentences, because of course one of the problems we have with these issues is that judges sometimes, despite the fact that the law allows for a high maximum sentence, sometimes don't do it. And so we have to find ways like mandatory minimums to encourage our judges to kind of do the better thing, as it were. Another thing that we're doing is with regard to some would call them date rape drugs. Okay, so say for example we want to increase the maximum penalty for production of Schedule II drugs. Okay, well first off I'll talk about marijuana. We want to increase the maximum penalty for production of Schedule II drugs like marijuana from 7 to 14 years. Okay, so some people say, oh well, what about the kid who just possesses a small amount? This is substantial amounts. We're talking 3 kilograms. Nobody could say that's for casual use. Okay, I think it could actually, a threshold lower than that. But anyhow, if somebody's possessing 3 kilograms or more of marijuana, it's obviously for the purposes of trafficking and selling, etc. And so we want to increase that from 7 to 14 years. And as well, if somebody's been previously convicted in the past 10 years, we want to see them, get a heavier sentence.
We have a jail system, a remand system that's already packed to the gunwales. there are sometimes double, triple bunking, and with that comes time credit. So these characters will sit in jail cooling their heels for a bit, and they'll get, for every day served, they'll get double time or they'll get triple time. And that's just the name of the game. The court recognize that and follow that practice. So the lawyers tell these characters, these gangsters, you just go and stay in remand for a period of time and we'll cut your time down real quick. And that's exactly what's happening. That and the bail, I mean, that's going to kick them out pretty fast.
I would hope that habitual doesn't fit the description of a lot of the gang members. I still believe that we need to do our best to reach these kids. Reach them before they ever get into these messes with these gangs. Work hard to get them out when we have the opportunity when they get trapped. It's not an easy world to exist in out there for our young people. But remember, we have to reach out and do what we can to keep them from getting involved with these messes. And the leaders of these things, man, get them out of here. Get them out of the society. Tuck them away. Don't worry about the kids they're going after to become part of these gangs. There's real grown-up individuals out there who are very experienced in what they do to trap people into this mess. So don't give up on that end of it either, but work hard to put an end to these other birds.
Something I just wanted to touch on related to this. We actually had a crack house that was operating next to our constituency office when we were on 17th Avenue, and I believe that our location was chosen specifically because we had traffic because we were in MP's office, so they thought that setting a crack house up near us would somehow hide their activity. It was a fascinating situation, and we busted it. What we did is the police, we talked with our local police there, and they told us to make sure to document the comings and goings of these people, to get their license plates, to get physical descriptions, take pictures if we possibly could, to email them to the liaison officer for the police. We did a lot of that, and they figured out when their high traffic patterns were, and they would come by for visitations and whatnot to disrupt, what they had as a traffic flow and a business model, if you will. And the thing that was most shocking, and Myron just alluded to this, which is the reason I wanted to bring this up. The thing that was most shocking was that I had assumed that some of these scruffy fellows that I saw that were in their 20s and 30s were actually, in a sense, the pimps and the dealers. And then you saw these young kind of teenage girls who really should have been in high school, it's very sad, who were turning tricks in order to pay for their addictions. What blew me away is that there was a man who was around 70-some years old who would drive up with a John Deere baseball cap, with a polyester coat and pants and comfortable shoes, and driving a New Yorker Fifth Avenue, who I thought was the elderly man who owned the property that was renting it to these people, unknowing and unsuspecting that it was being used as a crack house. What the police told me, I was shocked. This guy was one of the biggest distributors in the city and was very sophisticated. This was only one of a number of his operations. And he was always very polite and willing to invite the police in for coffee or tea, and was always very genteel with us. But it turns out he was the real brains behind the whole operation. I was shocked. And I also want to say, with regard to what Art was talking about with the remand centers, Adam Smith, said back in 1776 in The Wealth of Nations and his great writings that prisons were more valuable to a society than a palace. Because if you can take the people who break your sense of the law of contract and decency and remove them from the rest of society, you make better everybody else's life, and so it's more valuable than the palace.